Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Andrew Alderete, and I am the Integrated Vegetation Management Coordinator for the New Mexico Department of Transportation. And I'm originally from New Mexico. I'm a New Mexico native. I'm from the central part of the state in Torrance County. Went to school out there in the Estancia School District, and kind of worked in the workforce for a little while after I finished school. And sort of your traditional student here, I decided to come back to school here at Western when I was 25. And I ended up acquiring a bachelor's degree here. So it's good to be back and get all these memories back in mind again when I was here. And started working with the Department of Transportation in 2013 in maintenance. Worked maintenance for about a year. And after that, I got hired on with the project office in Moriarty in that area. And I worked as a civil engineer technician for 6 years in that position. And then I've been in this position here for 4 years with Bill's group, and been with the department a total of going on 12 years now. And here is Bill Hutchinson, the landscape architect, DOT.
So I'm the landscape architect for the DOT. My background is in horticulture and landscape architecture. I am a 40-year resident of Santa Fe. I'm originally from Colorado. I worked at the department for 20 years now. I manage a group within the Environmental Bureau. We have Integrated Vegetation Management. We do all the artwork that you may see on the bridges. We hire artists to engage on projects around the state. We manage the stormwater that comes off of our facilities, and we're doing a lot of what's called green stormwater infrastructure now, where we capture that water and use plants to filter it before it goes back into the waters. We also do public involvement having to do with our construction program. The DOT spends about $600 million a year building new highways and roads. Most of that's federal dollars. We also are responsible for the revegetation of the construction sites you see with bridges. I know some of you are interested in that, what kind of how we do that process. So that's a unit of the Environmental Bureau. The DOT itself has 2,200 people statewide. It has 82 patrols. And we're going to talk a little bit about just one of these patrols, which includes most of the 3 roads in the Gila that you all are interested in. Okay. So the question is first, I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes about what integrated vegetation management is for about 10 panels. And then Andrew's going to spend the rest of the time talking specifically about the Gila. IVM is a national movement by utility companies and DOTs, how to manage right-of-ways. The DOT itself, you'll see in the next slide, has over 220,000 acres of right-of-way, more than the state park system. And the goal of IVM is really to keep vegetation low and prevent trees from invading the right-of-way right next to the road, because they are a hazard. A significant number of fatalities on highways are caused by people running off the road and running into trees. So we try to keep that back and manage the vegetation essentially for ecology. As many of you know, with climate change, plants are on the move, and our corridors are essentially a bio zone, if you will, along the edge of the highways. It's largely untouched, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But we are a bioreserve. Most of our right-of-way is in far better condition than what's on the other side of the fence line because of grazing and the way some of the forests are managed here. So the main, let's go back one here. So we're looking for coordinated decision-making and the best strategies and monitoring and evaluation. Essentially, IVM is to use the simplest techniques possible. And the DOT, by and large, most of what it does is mow the edge of the right-of-way. And we'll show you a diagram that talks about that. Next. So this is a map of the state highway system. We have 15,000 miles of road. That the number I mentioned, 215,000 acres stretching from Chihuahuan Desert up to alpine areas. And almost all of that right of way is on easements. We don't actually own it. The actual road itself, everything else is just, in a sense, an easement on land that may belong to the Forest Service. As you know, there's a lot of federal land in the state, BLM, state trust land, some private land, or the tribal nations. So we have to manage the land off the edge of the highway with those other groups. A case in point is that the Forest Service has almost all the land in the Gila except for some private areas, and we have to work with them in terms of what we do off the edge of our highway. So most of that is left in a natural condition, and I'll tell you about that. And I also mentioned about the bioreserve part. Next. So Andrew and I have been on this for 4 or 5 years, and Andrew's managing this. So we created a document called Best Management Practices. This was in consultation with a lot of partners. We've worked with the Forest Service, the New Mexico Department of Agriculture, the tribal nations, and the idea is to increase safety. That's you may think the DOT is about the highways, but in fact, the DOT is about providing mobility and access, and it is primarily a safety organization. We're trying to provide the safest way for you all to move around. One of the ways we increase safety in the roadside environment is to knock back vegetation so that you can see what's going off the sides of the road. We also want to reduce the amount of browse for deer and other ungulates that may be hiding out in the edge because they jump out in front of traffic. So we have an obligation for safety first. And so, as many of you know, have noticed, if things grow up, you can't see what's going on, and it creates hazardous condition. We also want to protect our roads and bridges because vegetation, sadly, can disrupt those. We have a major problem with Chinese elms invading bridge structures, and their roots go down and starts ruining the structure itself. We have a lot of problems with invasive species, and that's one of the things Andrew will talk about it, but we have a major mapping effort identifying rare and endangered species, but also the invasives. Our highways, unfortunately, are kind of a corridor for this because vehicles transport a lot of weed seeds. Hay trucks, any kind of thing, they get caught up in the wheels of vehicles. So our roadside environment gets full of these things, and we need to map them. We constantly have new species invading from other states. So we have to identify those and come up with treatment plans. And then we're trying to also protect the habitats that's there. The latest is pollinator habitats to support New Mexico agriculture. So we've done a lot of mapping of the species out there, but we're trying to encourage other ones. So we've done extensive mapping of the waterways of the state. Andrew will talk about it, where we don't do spraying next to waterways, but we're also trying to protect wherever we have pollinator species. We're trying to encourage more pollinator species. 60% of the crops in the state need pollinator insects that work off of pollinators to pollinate them. So we're working with New Mexico agriculture in this regard. This document is a best management practice. That's one we created. It's pretty extensive. It talks about all the things we do in the roadside environment. We put it out for public comment. We've had a lot of meetings. It's available online for anyone who's interested. It talks essentially how the DOT is going to manage the roads. Next. So just to give you an idea of how deep we went with this, we did have public review of that. And then we worked with a lot of different agencies, such groups such as yourself. We've taken comment from a lot of environmental groups. We have cooperative weed management groups that are part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. There are 24, 25 of those around the state. We can only manage what's on our right of way, but what happens if an invasive gets over the fence onto other properties? So these are coordination efforts. We have a very active group in Taos that Andrew's been participating in, and a couple of others around the state, trying to focus together to deal with the invasive weed problem. And we also have the DOT website, which I would point you to because we have a lot of information on there. There was a lady interested in seed mixes. When we're not going to go into that in detail, but we have an interactive map that lists all the seed mixes we use around the state. Those are based on the NRCS natural resource areas plus SciNet, and we go into great detail. And we're now going to be redoing those lists and dividing them into lower elevation, higher elevation. But you, as a member of the public, can go to that map, put in your address, and it will pop up a seed mix that is customized for your region. And if you put your email address on the sign up we're going around, we can share that link with you. Next. So the management zones look like this. They are, we essentially have the roadway, and then we have these zones off the side, and each one is progressively less managed as you get away from the roadway. So the very first zone, zone 1, is really just managed for drainage, but it's also mowed. We have a problem in this state of people pulling off the road and their catalytic converters ignite the vegetation under them. So we have to provide a safe place for motorists to be. So, and also for the roadside drainage. Then the next zone out, zone 2, is a little bit less intensively managed. And then the outer one is typically not even managed at all. We'll show you some photos, but if you drive around the state, our default treatment is just what's called one pass of mowing, which is out about 15 feet from the edge of pavement. The rest of it, we let it be. Depending on where you are in the state, we have anywhere from 30 to 120 feet of right of way. So our goal is just let most of that in its natural state. We only intensively manage the first areas of it. Next. And so how do we protect existing habitats? We reduce mowing, and we're with the mapping that we've done. Now we're trying to work with our patrols to only mow to control weeds during before they flower, to prevent the spread, the ones that spread that way. So we do reduction of that. We are trying to reduce the herbicide use. The DOT essentially use herbicides, just spot treatment around signs or the edge of pavement. It is very rarely does it blanket put down herbicides. We've also been working, and we're reworking our herbicide approach to reduce the toxicity of the herbicides. And also, for those of you who know things about them, there are different modes of action, and we are restricting our teams to only using one mode of action at a time, so they will not be making cocktails of things up. We're very concerned about residual toxicity in the environment. So that's one of the other things we're doing with that. And we are revegetating as we need. And then Andrew will talk, we're removing hazardous trees. This is a big problem, particularly if there's been forest fires, but we have a lot of forests encroaching and trees become weakened and they'll fall. And that's an issue here in the Gila. And Andrew will show you some mapping that we've done. And then the no spray zones. For an arid state, we have a lot of drainages, and we have gone out and the waterways, we're protected under the U.S. Clean Water Act. As you know, there have been some Supreme Court decisions which weakened that, and now the state is working to take what's called primacy back so it can protect its own waterways from the EPA. So we've gone out and mapped, and essentially herbicides cannot be used within 50 feet of a waterway or in a acequia. So our preliminary indications are that we have about 15,000 miles of roadway, about 2,000 miles of that should be no spray zone. And we're starting a program where we're confirming that, and then we're going to be putting markers on all the fence lines so that our own crews know not to be spraying in those environments. So the last thing is the pollinator habitat. We have contracts with growers, and we're trying to grow New Mexico-centric species that we can put into our seed mixes. Right now, if you go get seeds, the contractors in our projects, they all come from a company called Granite Seed, which is in Lehi, Utah, and Denver. But those seeds come from anywhere in the Intermountain West. And part of the national seed strategy with the Bureau of Land Management is to use local indigenous seed varieties because they are adapted to this location. So we've had at least one successful project in this part of the state where we grew out seed. Now it's with a grower, and we'll be putting those in our seed mix. And we have a second one where they've gone out and collected seed from all over the state, Rocky Mountain Bee, Cleome, the Rocky Mountain Bee plant, a couple others. And those will be grown out and will make their way into our seed mix to encourage pollinators. I was talking to Don earlier, milkweeds are the bane for everyone's existence because we cannot get those to grow successfully by seed. You can do plugs, but we've had a struggle with it, and everybody's experiencing this. And we do have a lot of milkweed species growing in the States, so we're trying to protect those however we can. Next. So the State Natural Heritage Program has done mapping. This map, which is a little hard to read, but there are 133 areas, and these are where rare plants essentially are found, and they are a diversity of plants are found. You'll see down in the Gila, there's whole sections of them. And so where those intersect with our highways are areas that we would be practicing no spray zones. And we mentioned that because we've done extensive. We had Bob Savinsky through a consultant. Many of you may know him, but he's been out and they've essentially surveyed our entire right-of-way in the state. So we have all the rare and endangered species mapped. Only 2 of them occur in the Gila, by the way, within our right-of-way. So we know where they are. But we're very cognizant of the resource that these plants represent in the state. And these things are based on biodiversity, sensitivity, and priority. The lighter the color is, the less priority they are. So you get a sense of it, but there are pockets within the Gila which are high priority. Next. So why do we protect rare plants? It's because of the Endangered Species Act, also known as the ESA. So wherever our highways cross federal land, we by law have to protect them. And also most 85% of the money the DOT gets for highway construction comes from the feds. So it requires us to observe and protect those plants during the construction process. The federal species are also state listed, so we're paying attention to those lists as well. And we do consult with the MNERD. Erica Rowe is the state botanist with that organization, so we work with her. So that photo is one of the endangered species found, the Pinos altos flame flower, that's found in our right-of-way. So the activities that Andrew supervises, one is tree removal projects, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about that. This map in the upper left is an interactive map, which is not available to the general public quite yet, but every single mile of our right-of-way is mapped. And if you click on a segment of it, it'll tell you exactly what the treatment is for that part of the highway. And I'll show you in a moment the different criteria we used, how we protect the roads. The lower left picture, that is a very typical DOT facility. That's on US 550, but you'll see the grass along the road, that's the managed zone where the 4-wing saltbush is just left as it is. And then on the other side of the fence line, it's overgrazed. Very typical kind of scenario in New Mexico. The top right, the prickly poppy, and let's see what else is there. We have pollinator areas like this, or areas where wildflowers are very predominant. So we're trying very hard to only mow them after seed set when we can so that they can spread. And then the lower right picture shows the chipping of trees. So the mapping that we've done is extensive, as indicated. We're mapping and herbicide treatments. I'm going to show you a list of what we look for with that. The invasives, the rare plants, and the restricted spray zones. And we are developing management plans for all 82 patrols in the state, very detailed ones. We're doing this with the maintenance crews. This Gila management plan that you're about to see, or the beginnings of it, is one of those plans. You're actually the first one through the door. We're also doing plans. The DOT has 6 districts, and by this spring, we'll have plans for 2 of those, the area around Albuquerque and the area going from in the northwest part of the state, including the Navajo Nation, Gallup, and back towards Albuquerque. So again, pollinator habitats are one of our other priorities. And this is the last panel that I'm going to be talking about, but this is what we use to go out and interview all our crews to figure out what was actually, how we created that map of our treatments. The left-hand column is the different mowing treatments that can happen, but the default, as I mentioned, is just one pass mowing around the state. Most areas of the state that happens once, unless we have a wet year, they may do it again a second time. The vegetation treatment, there are herbicides used, but the default treatment, again, is just spot spraying with a relatively low strength herbicide, just around signs, along guardrails, places where it can obstruct sight lines. And then this is really interesting. The last column has to do with, we have a justification for why we do a treatment. There are many areas in the state where there are residents who are chemically sensitive, and if they let us know that, we will not spray by their houses. There's community acceptance. The DOT was essentially kicked out of Taos like 20 years ago. They said they didn't want to have any spraying going on. So they have a terrible noxious weed problem up there right now, and Andrew's been working with them, trying to so how can we work together to go after this? But we want to be safe with it. So that's where the coordination with the cooperative weed management areas. Some of the reasons for how we manage it has to do with dust control. So I was sharing with Don earlier, we have a problem with dust in numerous places in the state. A huge regional dust issue just southwest of here with the Lordsburg Playa. I've been part of the management team for a large project we're doing down there to stabilize areas way off our right of way to prevent the fatalities that keep occurring on I-10 due to the dust is always going to be present there because of the dried lake bed, but it's exacerbated by the presence of cattle that break the crust on those, and we have no control over that. There's long-term grazing leases with BLM and state trust land. We are working with those agencies. And so where the worst of that dust originated down there, we have fenced off 3,500 acres and restored it. And we have monitoring equipment run by NMSU and the Coronado Research Station, and we can prove that we have reduced the dust coming off those roads. So far, we haven't had a fatality in 7 years down there. So dust, also the fire break issue I mentioned, the landowning agencies, what their requirements are. The agreement that the DOT had with the U.S. Forest Service expired about 10 years ago and hasn't been renewed, so we don't do any spraying on Forest Service land that's adjacent to our roads anywhere in the whole state of New Mexico. They may do some of their own, but we do not do that. So that includes almost the entirety of the Gila. So noxious weeds are another priority, sensitive species, and so on. I'm not going to read all of these, but to let you know that we really drill down and try to figure out all the different reasons why parts of the right-of-way need special management. So that's kind of the overview of IVM. And so with that kind of background, Andrew is going to go into the detail of the management plan that we're developing for this part of the state.
Yeah, so I hope you all got a pretty good idea of what the Integrated Vegetation Management Program is about. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about the Gila Management Plan proposal. And we thought we'd start off with a little bit of a timeline on how all this got started. So back in June of 2023, we received a letter by your organization, the Gila Native Plant Society, in partner with the Southwestern New Mexico Audubon Society and the Heart of the Gila, and about mowing concerns and timing of vegetation management and weed management control, stuff like that. And I believe there were some other issues about stockpiling of materials that were on the side of the road that ended up being an issue too, that was brought to our attention. In June of 2023, Cabinet Secretary Serna responded with a link to our IVM Best Management Practices document with the assurance that staff would more closely address these concerns. In August of 2023, we got a consultant to engage in developing the Gila Management Plan for specific best management practices. Stakeholders include the district, the NMDOT District 1, which is where we're located, and collaboration with U.S. Forest Service, since most of these areas go through their property, their easement. And the groups, as I mentioned earlier, as you all signed in on the sheet, will be invited to participate in public comment. From March 2024 to currently to the present, we've had a kickoff meeting with the districts and with the U.S. Forest Service to talk about all of the concerns that you brought to our attention and to see how we're going to go about mitigating this stuff and making sure that the district that is involved, the district maintenance personnel, either have the resources and the ability to be able to do some of this stuff. And we also did a couple of site meetings. Field surveying of the area of all of these concerns are mapped out, which I'll show you here shortly. Right-of-way research, which includes blueprints of our right-of-way to make sure we know who's in charge of maintaining what. And then the draft report generation will be the final theme on that particular bullet there. And then May of 2025, May of this year, the Gila management plan will be available for public comment.
Advances, right? You can do the advances if you want. Okay.
So.
What is this?
So here, what are the Gila management plan goals? So first of all, we want to identify targeted invasive weeds. We want to coordinate that with U.S. Forest Service since a lot of it is within their easement and we'll have to do what they prescribe for that. Potential relocation of stockpile materials. Now, I'm sure you are all familiar with that eyesore of, roadway materials being stockpiled on the side of the road. So we want to make sure these materials stay away from streams and they're not sloughing off and erosion is pushing them into the streams. Drainage improvements. I know there are some areas on New Mexico 35, which I'll talk about in a little more detail as we go along. Identify areas that may need revegetation. Manage uncontrolled access points, which we'll also have to coordinate with Forest Service on that because, well, I'll get into more detail on how we assessed that later on. Map and protect rare plants and identify hazardous trees. So right here, this picture here on the upper left is an example of an unauthorized access path. If it was unauthorized, is if it didn't have a number or a sign associated with it designated by Forest Service. So this is something we have to confirm with them to make sure it's either a non-access path or a path, or maybe it is a path that's designated by them and the sign's gone. So that's something that's we're gonna have to talk about, see if we can figure out. This top right photo is an example of a hazardous tree. As you can see, it's pretty sickly looking and it's already tilting towards the roadway. So since we were already coming through these areas, Forest Service had asked us if we could gather that data for them. So that way they know when to go in and kind of take care of all of the hazardous trees. This bottom right is an example of a pull-off or a turnout. And as you all know, there's hundreds of them throughout, right? I mean, some of them may be useful. Some of them should probably be fixed, covered up, blocked off. Perhaps we could do some sort of a revegetation with it. It's still something that we're talking about doing. So many different things we can deal with on that. This lower right-hand picture is an example of a stockpile. As you can see right here, this is the outer edge of it. And this particular pile is running adjacent to Cherry Creek. And this is what I'm talking about. We should not be putting stockpiles like this next to creeks. So we're in the process of looking at alternative locations to put these. And
Sorry, what are we looking, what is that?
this is a pile of roadway material right here.
Okay.
And this is it's been sitting there for so long. This is a portion of it that has eroded away and it's starting to go into the stream. And then you can see here at the bottom where there's rills starting to develop from erosion.
The piles are usually chip sealing, so they're inert, they're not hazardous by themselves, but
Right,
they
yeah.
can slough into the road, into the waterways.
Yeah, there's no like oily residues or anything like that in these piles, but they do consist of coarse gravel and fine materials as well. Next.
So wait a second. I'll give you that.
I got it.
You got it.
I got it.
All right.
Thank you. So the roadways addressed in the plan, so we have, I'm sorry, New Mexico 15 from Silver City to the Gila Cliff Dwellings, that whole stretch of roadway. We also surveyed New Mexico 30, Highway 35 from Highway 152 all the way north to where it joins with 15. And then we also surveyed 152 from Emery Pass to US 180. Now, the only reason why we didn't do the entirety of Highway 152 is because it's separated by two different patrols that manage it. So on this side of Emery Pass, it's the Silver City Patrol that manages it. And then on the eastern side of Emery Pass, it's the Williamsburg Patrol that manages that end. So here's the map to show you what it looks like. And here and highlighted in yellow are the areas that we ended up surveying. And this is also to give you an idea of what land management agencies these stretches of roadways pass through. Next. There it goes. Invasive weed treatments. So these are some of the herbaceous weeds that we found in the area. Poison hemlock. Of course, you know, we can't do any treatments on this without coordination with the US Forest Service, since it is on their land. So we got poison hemlock that we found. We have a bull thistle, sweet clover, which is an invasive, but it is not considered a noxious weed, and it's not categorized as one. But as was brought to our attention, that it does grow a lot along the roadsides out in these areas on 15 and 35. So being able to mow those at the right time of year is going to be ideal before they start going to flower and seed. So we're working on a plan to give the patrol that so they know what time of year they need to start their mows to start kicking this back a bit. We found some cheatgrass on some locations. That one also responds well to mowing if you mow it at the right time of year before it goes to seed. And then the weeping lovegrass. So that is going to be a proposed dual treatment of timed mowing and perhaps some sort of a treatment from US Forest Service. Next. So here's a map of the herbaceous weeds that we found. So it consists of cheatgrass, bull thistle, weeping lovegrass, poison hemlock, and sweet clover. The bull thistle is represented by the purple circles here, and we only found occurrences of that on Highway 152 near just south of Emery Pass. The poison hemlock, the only place where we found occurrences of that was within this area here on Highway 35. And then the rest of them, the cheatgrass, the weeping lovegrass, and the sweet clover, were all distributed out through here. And this is where we found most of these occurrences that were on Highway 35. A little bit throughout here on Highway 15, but not as clustered as in here. Exotic tree species. So here's another one, the woody species that we found, tree of heaven. I'm sure you all are familiar with out here, the Siberian elm, and the Russian olive. So we're gonna most likely recommend the tree of heaven as a top priority because of how difficult it is to control. You know, it grows up through its root systems. It's such a resilient plant that usually for the most part requires multiple treatments to get rid of it. So that's something that we'll have to discuss with Forest Service to see how they want to go about doing that. Siberian elm, of course, probably where there was more of that than anything else that we found. It's also a very resilient tree, as you all know. And the best way to take care of that is to chop it down as low as the ground as possible and to treat it with a chemical stump treatment, because if you don't treat it, it's just going to grow right back. So getting that taken care of right away is a good thing. Russian olive, not so many occurrences of Russian olive out here that we ran into in our survey, but it's there. So that's kind of lower on the totem pole, so to speak, as far as recommendations go for treatment. So here's a map to show you the distribution of the woody species, invasive species that we found. And the Siberian elm is represented by the white circles. So you could see how widespread that is. All up and through here. Bird of paradise and the other species are pretty spread out as well, but not as much as the Siberian elm. So Siberian elm does really spread quickly and grows fast.
Yep.
So the turnout management and recommendations. So here's all those areas where, you know, we have turnouts. Some of it leads to unauthorized access. Some of it leads to spread of roadway materials where they should not be. So one of the big concerns that was brought to our attention is that on some of these turnouts here, we get situations where we'll come and we'll push stuff off to the side and it goes downhill into the drainages, you know, further spreading noxious weed seeds and stuff of that nature. So we want to recommend that we stop that practice, and hopefully we can get a practice into place to where they haul that material off rather than pushing it off to the side, because all it's doing is making these bigger. Over the years, so many years down the road, you just keep pushing stuff off the side. What's going to happen? It's just going to build up. So we really want to stop that practice. So we'll have to coordinate with Forest Service on these turnouts to be able to do that. The revegetating of closed access to excess turnouts. We have areas like this here on this far right picture, where it's just bare ground where people go and drive around and go mud bogging. I mean, I'm sure you have all seen those spots out there where there's just ruts everywhere. I want to put something together with the Forest Service to see if we can't get those areas revegetated, perhaps put some sort of a pollinator habitat in there, you know, native plants, stuff of that nature, just to discourage that access from driving in there. I got it, Bill.
Okay.
So here's a map of the turnouts that were mapped out on these stretches of roadway. So the orange triangles represent turnouts to close and to perhaps revegetate, which is represented by the circle is revegetated areas. So those are just recommended to be revegetated. And then the green triangle represents turnouts to keep, because we did talk to the Forest Service about this a little bit, and they said, well, there's a lot of recreational vehicles that come through. There's a lot of cyclists that ride this area. So we want to make sure that there are some pullouts for them if they need to stop, they need a rest, things of that nature. And as you all know, there are some portions around turns that are pretty narrow, and some of these pull-offs kind of help to get around traffic and things of that. And you know, people park on the side of the road to go hiking in the area. It's a beautiful area, right? I mean, that's stockpile management recommendations. So getting a little further into the stockpile management, first and foremost, we want to protect water quality in sensitive areas, which this is a sensitive area. We want to reduce visual impact by relocating either further from the roadway and restoring previous stockpile locations. Now that could mean two things. Either we reuse locations like this particular location right here, which was used as a stockpile location years ago, or we can completely cover it, revegetate it, and not use it as one anymore and find an alternative location. Here's another advantage of this stockpile right here, so you could see how close it is to the creek here. And you can see that this pile has been here a little over a year and what it looks like already and how much has already sloughed off into this waterway right here. Erosion control, that's a big thing with these stockpiles as well. Whenever we get rain events that come through this area, what happens to the water? It goes around the pile, it starts to dig ruts and things of that nature, show spots of erosion. So we're kind of recommending for these situations, if it necessarily has to stay and for whatever purposes, they couldn't get to it because, the weather came or some other factor happened. We want to make sure that we have containment around them with some sort of a mulch sock, some sort of silt fence, some sort of perhaps even concrete wall barrier, something temporary to keep that pile from migrating off site. So right here is the map where we mapped out all of these locations where stockpiles are on these stretches of roadway. So the circle indicates where stockpiles, are currently located. And then the triangle represents proposed stockpile locations that are a little bit farther off the road to where nobody would be able to see them. Hazardous tree management. So this is an important one, not just for this area, but around the state, as Bill had mentioned earlier. So just to get into a little bit of how we did it here. So as we mapped them out, we looked at the status of the tree. Is it living? Is it stressed? Is it dying? Is it already dead? The hazard type, is it leaning? Is it a standing snag? Is it a visibility hazard? So we ended up identifying approximately 165 hazard trees, and nearly 50%, nearly half of what we found was in the first management zone of the right of way. So that's pretty significant.
Are those mostly on Highway 15?
I'll get into the map here and I'll show you all of the different locations where we mapped them out. So right here is the map that shows different priorities of trees. They're not all in the same category. They're not all in the same condition. So anything that was pretty much dead and leaning was put at priority 1 because the root systems are already rotting on these trees. They're going to fall any year, right? So we kind of prioritized it that way. Anything that was still living, even if it was leaning, is still alive and it still showed good signs of life, we put it as a lower priority. But not to mention that we should probably keep an eye on it just in case. Management of unauthorized access roads. So this was a really big one. I don't know if you are all familiar with Patrice Muchnick. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. Muchnick. Her and I came out a couple of times and looked at a lot of these areas, and this was a really big concern of hers. This was a really big concern because people are coming in, they're making new trails, they're making new roadways, and they're not designated Forest Service trails. So being able to work closely with Forest Service on this is going to be key. So approximately 25 sites identified. Most are on New Mexico 15, of course. Forest Service evaluation and action is required to close access to these areas because they're the only ones that have the map and they know what's supposed to be a designated trail and what isn't. Closure techniques could include fencing, logs, boulders, gates, perhaps, if that's how the Forest Service wants to do. Just to discourage access in these locations. Signage and revegetation could also be an option. We just kind of have to assess a little further what would make sense to revegetate. So here's a distribution map on where these unauthorized access paths are located. Of course, as mentioned on the previous slide, most of them occur on Highway 15. And then there's a few up here just south of Emery Pass that we mapped out as well that are have some legitimate concerns with them as well, as far as material being pushed off to the side and things of that nature. Well, here we go. Now we get into the rare plant observations that we got into, that we actually observed out in the field. So these are the only two species that we observed within the right of way out there. And I'll show the map on where those were located. So we have the Arizona gumweed, which is pretty widespread out there on the side of the road. The way we did the survey on these is that we went out and, we looked at the suitable habitat here, this likes rocky slopes and ledges, pinon juniper woodland and lower montane conifer forests. And the Pinos altos flame flower likes grassland, oak woodland, pinon juniper woodland, and is often found with bear grass and Perry's agave. And if we didn't see suitable habitat for these species, we didn't bother looking. But when we saw habitat, we would stop, we would look, and we made sure that there weren't any populations present. So here are some other plant observations that weren't observed by us, but by other individuals. So we got the Mogollon Whitlow grass up here, this first picture on the far left. Wooten's hawthorn, picture number 2. Mimbres figwort, we got here picture number 3. McGuire's milk vetch 4. McAfee's ground cell number 5. Thyme leaf mock orange number 6, and then Indian braids number 7. So these were instances where other individuals saw this, and also that if anybody had information that maybe we missed or we didn't know, I mean, you're more than welcome to share it with us if you choose to. So here's the map that we used. So these little hexagons here were provided to us as these rare plant areas that run into these sections. So what we did is we incorporated these polygons into our GIS map as we were doing the survey. And as we were driving these portions of roadway, as we were driving, the GPS would show us that we're entering that particular polygon. So as we would enter, say like right here, for example, into this polygon on the map, that's when we would start looking for habitat for those particular species. And if we didn't find any suitable habitat, then we kept going. But like, for example, here, where we found the Arizona gumweed and the Pinos altos flame flowers represented by these star points right here. So these are the locations where we found both of those species. So rare plant best management practices. So we definitely want to restrict spraying. I mean, we can't spray here anyway because it's Forest Service land, and without a contract, we really can't go that route there. But we can mow, and some of the timed mowing is going to really help with getting rid of the sweet clover and stuff like that, and perhaps maybe allowing for more of this stuff to start growing in. Improve habitats by reducing turnouts and unauthorized access and better stockpile management. So now just by mitigating this here alone is going to really help make a difference in the area. We want to make sure that all of this stuff gets addressed so we can make it more of a natural area that people can enjoy. Avoid over disturbing drainage patterns. And then monitoring, of course, monitoring to make sure that the stuff that we're employing out there is working. If it's not working, what can we do to change it? Closely monitoring on all of these plans is gonna be really important going forward, just to make sure that we get the right practice down. As you can see here in this picture, you know, this is the main mowing scheme throughout the state. You can see that this is zone 1 right here, so this is the most actively managed part of the right of way, and then it kind of transitions into natural habitat beyond that. So what are the next steps gonna be? So right now, this is just a proposal. We're working on getting a draft review together. So that's coming up here pretty soon. We'll have to consult with US Forest Service on that to make sure that not only are their concerns addressed, but your concerns are addressed as well. The draft plan will be ready for review in March of this year, March 2025. And you are all invited to publicly comment on that once it comes up and it gets posted. Final plan should be around May or June of this year. And then once we get the final plan instituted, we can start implementing the plan based off of our agency's funding and resources.
I could talk a little bit about this diagram. This is basically how the DOT handles any project. And that is, we're trying to be transparent as an agency about how we make decisions. We do have a responsibility for public safety, so safety trumps everything. But typically there's a DOT management team, which is Andrew and myself, and the District 1, which is actually the owner of this road. They're based in Deming, and they've been involved in creating this presentation. They've been involved in our meetings with the Forest Service and the drives. But we make these decisions, so we're part of a study team. However, we do not make those decisions by ourselves. We listen to people like yourselves. It's very important to get feedback from you all and the general public, people who use the highways. Probably the most difficult group to reach because they pass through and we have no way to reach them other than just putting ads or whatnot or having public meetings. But we will be posting this whole plan for public comment. And then, of course, we have agency stakeholders. US Forest Service, in this case, is the main one, but also the New Mexico Department of Agriculture is involved in noxious weed management. So it's just to kind of show how it works and be transparent about our process. This is required under federal law, but we also observe it with state-funded projects. It's called the NEPA process, for those of you who may have not heard of it, but it's the National Environmental Policy Act requires that if you have federal dollars in a project that you involve people and you be very transparent about how your decision-making goes. So anyway, we thought that would be of interest to everybody.
And that concludes our presentation for the IVM program and the Gila Vegetation Management Plan. Are any questions? Yes, sir.
I was interested in your comments about cheatgrass and weeping lovegrass. And the slides showed that the management plan for those is mowing. The problem with mowing is those two species are grasses like any other grass. And all you'll do with mowing is knock them down for a few weeks and they're back. I think what you'll be able to do by doing mowing is you'll be able to prevent ignition by catalytic converters, but you won't achieve much else. But the Forest Service has at its, I know you can't spray, but the Forest Service also has prescribed burns as a possible way of managing those species. And I wonder if they've thought about, you know, some of those huge forests of cheatgrass, especially out as you get closer to hot springs and cliff dwelling, just huge forests of cheatgrass. I wonder if they thought about it.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because early on, when we started this program, right, Bill, that was kind of mentioned, right? Fire use for cheatgrass.
Yeah. Which raised the hair in the back of the heads of the DOT. It's
And at the time, there was already fires raging. I think it was the one up north near Las Vegas that was going on at the time.
Mhm.
And they're like, no, fire is completely out of the question. So the next best thing is the mowing. So we're trying to stick to that because, you know, hopefully later on in the future, we can adopt fire as a process. I'd really like to, but, that's just one of those things that's just, we're not equipped. The DOT isn't equipped to deal with fire. That's just not one of our specialties. So
And cheatgrass is completely out of control in our Mountain West. I mean, the BLM is struggling with it.
now I have been thinking about perhaps maybe collaborating with another agency like BLM, Forest Service, those individuals that do have the resources to be able to do prescribed burns. But that's still kind of up in the air right now. Yes, sir.
Well, yeah, I'm just preparing a basic management plan for the Gila Wilderness.
Yeah.
I work for the Gila National Forest. My recommendations are we don't do anything. Like cheatgrass. It's too widespread. The research I've done indicates it being exceedingly difficult, especially in the wilderness, to control cheatgrass. And from what I have read, that, I mean, the one concern I have, and you can tell me, is, you know, where it's been a problem, has been in Utah and Nevada, where it would actually form these dense stands, I guess in sagebrush. It's a spring flowering grass. And so if that stuff, you know, when it dries out and fire catches it, what I've read is what it causes the cheatgrass populations to expand. So it's a big problem in Utah and Nevada. But so far as I know, that's not a problem in New Mexico. What do you guys know? Has that ever been demonstrated here?
Not that I know of. No, I don't know of any demonstrations where that has happened. Do you, Bill?
Yeah.
And I might also mention that, you know, from what, like I said, from what I've read, we wanted to control cheatgrass. You not only have to get rid of it, but then you got to go and you would have to plant, because what it likes to do is take over the gaps between perennial plants. And so you'd have to find a way to plant stuff in there. So you're talking a lot.
You're absolutely right, you know, and that's a big problem because we have a lot of areas throughout our right of way where the grasses are just, there's so many voids in between, bare ground, grass, bare ground,
Right.
grass, you know, a huge section of big, you know, bare ground, and then a few pieces of grass here and there. So yeah, I just know exactly what you're talking about. So in situations like that, we're recommending to do some sort of a revegetation, depending on the area, depending on the sensitivity of it and stuff like that. But really, this is a whole statewide effort on my behalf because I want to make sure that we get vegetation where we need it. You know, we really, really do need our vegetation along our roadways to slow down that erosion, to protect our roadway foundations. And a lot of times when it rains and we get water that collects on the side of the road, that vegetation soaks it all up and doesn't give it a chance to soak underneath the roadway foundation. So that's happening in a few areas around the state. So yeah, we want to probably recommend revegetating those particular areas like that.
I think statewide, the Forest Service is more up in arms about yellow bluestem. When I first started the DOT, that was actually in our seed mix, I'm sorry to admit, along with Lumen's Love Grass, and they came from the NRCS, but we quickly removed the non-native invasives. But the yellow bluestem tends to thrive along the edge of our roads because there's a little bit more water running off the roads crowned in harvest. And that's why it's considered undesirable. It's lower protein. It's invading the blue grama stands because blue grama is high protein grass, relatively speaking. So the Forest Service is actually pretty focused on that. They want to put it on the noxious weed list, but that takes a long time.
Where have you seen, Gila National Forest did a survey for it. I don't know, about 6 or 7 years ago. What they found it was primarily, almost entirely along roadsides.
Yes.
Have you seen it expanding beyond that?
Have not, but there's a concern that it would move along drainages or places where there's more moisture available. So I think that's one of the target species that we're looking at, actually, you know, that we're a little bit constrained to actual things that are on the, you know, the noxious weed list with A, B, and C, and we really just focus on A and B. But then our hands are kind of tied right now because we don't have an agreement with the Forest Service. But that's one of the ones I think is more on the radar than cheatgrass is at the moment.
Would make more sense.
Yes.
I do have another question. I'll let Jackie have a question.
Would you tell us about the seed mix that you use on roadsides?
I don't have it. I don't know if there's a way to access the web here, but that interactive map, you can easily go to it yourself. If you go to DOT, yes, NMDOT, we have our main website, and you can click in interactive seed map. Or give us your email address and we'll send you a link to it. But we have it segregated by cool season grasses, warm season grasses, cool season grasses, and wildflowers. And again, we did the research, so they're totally indigenous species. And we do have some non-native quick cover grass in there because we're responsible for soil stabilization right off the bat on our projects. So we do use quick guard, which is triticale, but it's sterile. It doesn't come back again. And we also use oats. But those are the only two. And the rest of it, what we want to get is a climax community of warm season grasses with some wildflowers. But it usually takes at least 2 or 3 years, unless you're at a higher elevation. It takes a while, and we often get a whole flush of invader weeds because there's a whole bunch of relic seed in the soil. We get a lot of kochia and tumbleweed and whatnot the first year, but it sort of settles down, and after 3 to 5 years, it's pretty stable, and you have the good things that you want. I'm sorry, I don't have. I should have been thinking and we could have shown you the map and showed you the lists, and there are downloadable lists right there, and they're available. We get them from Granite Seed, the plants of Southwest and Santa Fe, or there are a lot of seed suppliers. Curtis and Curtis, we over in the eastern side of the state, they provide seed to some of our projects.
Yeah, so that map is divided up into ecoregions throughout the state, and each ecoregion has a specific seed mix for that particular area.
What gives the green color to the seed mix that's sprayed on the roadside?
It's a dye that's put in there so that the inspectors can see that it was actually
That
done.
way it shows uniformity
Yeah.
in its application, and then after a day or two, it fades out.
Yeah, that's we have 2 different seed type ways that we do it. One of them, our mainstay, we're doing in Williamsburg right now, we're doing like 50 acres, but the main way we do on areas that are relatively flat is that we till compost mulch into an inch of compost mulch in the top 4 inches of soil, and then we drill seed these mixes, and then we crib straw into it, and we put tackifier that is made of guar. It's like a sticky substance, and we spray that over the top, and it basically is 100% stabilized with just that treatment, and it just sits there and waits for rain to happen, which sometimes can be a year. You know? On steeper slopes where we can't get equipment in, we track the slope to roughen it up, and then we spray down the seed so we have good seed soil contact, and then we put hydro mulch over the top that has that dye in it, and then we put a rock mulch over the top of it because it holds it in place and it harvests whatever water does fall. So it is available for the plants right there. And we found that works really well around the state. It's expensive, but that way we don't get the rilling and the gullies forming on the side of the road. Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions.
Mhm.
The first is, what do you do when you find yourself in a situation where you have, rare or native plants that you want to allow to go to seed, and you also have these other invasive species kind of intermingled with them? How do you kind of balance the need to knock down the invasive species while supporting
So.
the native species? How do you handle
So
that?
we haven't really run into that yet, but if that were to occur, what I would recommend is removing them that are really close by whatever the population of whatever the rare plant is. Having them removed by hand, and if there are any with a buffer zone of about 50 feet away from any individual plants, maybe doing some sort of a spot treatment.
Because like Becker and Delia, you cannot find it like past the road. It only wants to
It
grow.
only wants to grow there,
The
that's
only
right.
place it will grow.
Hmm.
So my second question is, you know, I don't remember when this was, maybe you all remember, but the Forest Service came to the community with this whole fire mitigation plan. And one of the real concerns that we had is treating, you know, basically poisoning trees and then ending up with standing dead, and which then creates more of a fire hazard. And to be brutally honest, there is not full faith that it will be gotten around to come back and remove the material. And in fact, there was an incident on BLM land where standing, you know, dead that had been treated was not removed and contributed to fire. So who is going to be responsible? Like if you guys come and kill a tree, who's going to make sure that tree does not remain as a fire hazard? Whose responsibility is it?
I don't think we would be spraying herbicides
Yeah,
on
we
trees and
wouldn't
come
be-
and remove them. If
Yeah,
they're
they would be,
endangered,
they would be cut, and depending on what species it is, the stump would be treated. Just that individual
And
stump.
the material will be removed. Or like-
Yeah, whatever's cut, yeah, all of that should be removed and mulched and cut up and hauled off. Yeah. And that's how we currently do it on the right of way. So any tree removal project that I have where we remove trees from the right of way, what they do is anything larger than 10 inches in diameter gets cut up and hauled off. Anything below that gets mulched and spread along the highway, the side of the road.
Thanks.
Is that in hazard trees or invasive? Trees?
So the treating of them,
Yeah.
yeah, that would be with invasives. The treating with hazard trees, if they're native and they end up being a hazard tree, they'll just be cut down. Just to eliminate that hazard.
So it's invasive, like let's say elm. So you're cutting them down and then are you treating them with a chemical?
Treating the stump with a chemical, yes.
And the Forest Service has given their blessing for.
We're not currently doing that on Forest Service land, just on DOT right away. Yeah.
we have been in contact, the Forest Service has been engaged and they're very excited to work with us. So we believe that they are participating with this plan and they will give us permission without having some master agreement. They're going to give us permission to work based on our mapping and all of that. That's where we're wanting to go with this, because obviously some of these things are urgent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, we're kind of hoping in this process that we can get our agreement renewed sometime here soon, but we don't know for sure when that's gonna be.
So
Kind of waiting on them to see what they want to do.
would you expect that you would have an agreement then by, I can't remember, May, was it May? When you thought that the plan might be approved?
May, yes, the plan, yes.
And are you trying to put in the treatment of invasives trees with that in the right of way?
Yes, but that would be completely up to the Forest Service on how they want to go about that. Yeah.
So then there could be a possibility of treating other species like cheatgrass in the right of way or the love grass?
As far as the cheatgrass and the love grass go, I'm not sure, but if it is a class A or B noxious weed listed in the state, then definitely it'll be considered for treatment.
Because I wonder if like, maybe considering like a pre-emergent, you know, on cheatgrass, and then seeding like you want to do with native grasses along there could be some kind of, acceptable proposition.
Sure.
To the Forest Service.
Yeah, that would be in it.
You know what I mean? Like,
Acceptable
so you're not just treating it, killing it, but you're not letting it come up and then you're.
Replacing it with something
replacing
else,
it With what
right?
you want,
Mhm.
pollinator species.
Exactly.
And I'm curious, like, are you working with each individual district? Are you working with SO people? Supervisor office people? With the
So,
Forest Service?
I'm basically working with, Elizabeth.
District Ranger.
The district ranger. So, yeah, so I've been kind of back and forth with her and talking with her about how we want to go about doing some of this stuff, yeah. Yeah, she was actually out there on on a couple of the field visits that we had and was pointing out stuff to us, and we were kind of discussing things on how we want to move forward with doing some of this stuff, so.
She's solid, so that's nice.
Yes,
I just have a request, that is, I would hope that you could be sparing in how you use non-native soil stabilizing grasses. And the reason I say that is our local experience with, especially triticale. And I wonder if there may be several different suppliers of that, because the sterile triticale lasted 5 years in the muggions after the
Really?
quality.
I've never seen it come back on our projects. I mean, we experimented and there was too much of it at first and it was robbing precious water. So we dialed it way back, but it, it just is like quick staple.
It can't be as sterile as they say it is. It's their 5 year.
Yeah, seriously, yeah. That's one reason we had annual rye in for a while, and that's one reason we did away with it, because it seemed to be persistent. It was self-seeding in the drainages and stuff. But I have not experienced that with the triticale. I don't know, maybe there are differences. I'll look into that.
So if the state road goes through the forest, is the right of way, is that that's yours?
it
to
would
do?
be from edge of pavement to edge of pavement. That would be our right of way.
Edge of, oh, just
Just
the
from
pavement
pavement to pavement, yeah, edge of pavement to edge of
So,
pavement. Anything
and-
beyond that
is
is
forest.
Forest Service, yes.
There is no right of way.
Basically, yeah, there is no
Okay.
right of way.
Okay.
Yeah. That's all easement.
So the three highways that you're talking about, are they all currently under easement or?
Some,
permit?
most of the portions of them are within Forest Service easement.
A large
easement.
part of them were just only under special use permit. I retired about 10 years ago. And like Highway 35 and Highway 15, and weren't even an easement. Are they making any advance in that, getting that done?
It was difficult to even get the information we did. The district did a search and I don't know, Andrew's got mapping.
So we basically found blueprints of our right of way in these areas, but they're not included in areas where there's Forest Service. It's in the areas that are still on private property or passing through private property. Or we could still see fence line on either side of the road. That's all I was able to find. Go ahead.
I just want to ask, I guess, a follow-up question. So what did I use the word right of way for pavement? You said the pavement was the only right of way,
Mhm.
and the easement then is next to it, right? So if it's a state road going through the forest, is there an easement for you to be able to maintain the grass next to the road?
All we could do,
If
and
it's forest?
I know we don't have an agreement, but since we do maintain that section of roadway, all we can really do is mow.
Oh, but you can do that.
Yeah, we can mow. Yep.
Okay.
Well, you guys, we try to keep the programs 1 hour and we're already about quarter after. But they'll be around for a few minutes if people want to talk to them out in the hall. We do have refreshments over there, so you're welcome to stay and